My home is someone's workplace. What you don't know about pay safe and sick leave law. My name is Tatiana Bejar. I am a New York City lead organizer at Hand in Hand, the Domestic Employers Network. And I'm very excited to be in this webinar with you all. Thank you for joining us tonight in such a beautiful evening to cover this important topic, the legal responsibilities and the complexities of this law, all critical information you need to know to ensure your home is a fair workplace. Basic leave also continues to be critical for all of us as we continue living in a health crisis with the COVID-19 pandemic. People, including workers, still need to quarantine, take vaccination, care for themselves or family members. Additionally, just I believe a week ago, New York State has declared a state of emergency due to the rise of the monkeypox. So for tonight's webinar, we'll have invited our amazing advocates to talk about the pay safe and sick leave. Amalia Torrentes, a hand-in-hand consultant, and our employer leaders, Salwa Baida and Liz Weiner, will share also key information and their experiences implementing these policies at home. I believe we also have workers on the call. Welcome. All amazing domestic workers, people who provide care and love in our homes. And one of them, Meches, will also be sharing some thoughts as well as we go along with the webinar. So I would love to make some intros. We are again happy you are joining us tonight. Welcome, welcome everyone who is just joining at this time. Again, my name is Tatiana Bejar. I am with Hand in Hand, the Domestic Employers Network. My gender pronouns are she, her, hers, ella en español. I live in Rockaway, Queens. I'm ally of domestic workers. And yes, I have taken basic leave to care for myself and my family members several times. And we'd love to hear from you as well. So please use the chat box to introduce yourself, share your name and gender pronouns, your location, what is your connection with domestic work, whether you are a domestic employer or a domestic worker, or you are an ally. And if you have been able to take basic leave at your job. This is the topic for tonight, so we want to start with that question. Have you ever taken basic leave in your workplace? So let me see. So I see that some people, okay, if you want to use the chat box to please introduce yourself. I see that earlier Alisa introduced herself, your name, gender pronouns, where you're calling from, your connection with domestic work. Hi, Alisa. So as you use the chat box, Liz, welcome, joining us from Brooklyn. She's an employer of a domestic worker, and she has taken sick day last week, actually, to care for her son. Hi, Salwa, also an employer of a house cleaner and a daughter of a former house cleaner and home health aide. Yeah, all our care stories are very connected. And again, we live our independence, right? So please use the chat box to continue introducing yourself. We want to share with you what are our goals for tonight's webinar. At Hand in Hand, the Domestic Employers Network, we recognize how confusing it is to be an employer. You find yourself in need to hire someone to provide care for your children or a family member, to get support to have your house clean and organized, and in many cases without really any guidance or a human resources office that will help you go through that hiring process and ensure that you are complying with the law and you are actually being a fair employer. So tonight we aim to help you to implement pay safe and sick leave. So we'll learn about legal requirements under this law. For example, how much sick leave you should provide for a part-time or full-time domestic worker, the steps you need to take. Now, if the person you employ gets sick, what can safe leave be used for? What happens if you don't provide sick leave? We'll also learn and exchange recommendations from employers who want to do the right thing. We'll also hear from workers. So we obviously invite workers to share as well. And we'll answer any questions or concerns you may have. So you have also questions as we start with the webinar and all this really important information we're going to be sharing. Please, again, feel free to use the chat box to drop any comments, concerns, needs to clarification, and any questions you have. We'll be taking some time later in the webinar to answer and to address those questions. So right now, I'm excited to introduce our amazing leader, Salwa Baida. She is a hand-in-hand New York City employer who will be talking about what we do and who we are. Pass it over to you, Salwa.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Tatiana, for all of your work. Thank you all for being here with us this evening. Buenas noches. Forgive my voice tonight. We'll just keep it moving. I might need some paid sick leave myself. Unfortunately, I am at home with my kid at the moment, and the boss does not let us take paid leave, which is him. But anyhow, hi everybody. My name is Salwa Baida. I am the employer of a house cleaner. I'm a parent, I'm an attorney, and I'm the daughter of a retired housekeeper and home health aide. I've been a member of Hand in Hand since 2019, and I thought it was an amazing organization. I thought it was brilliant, and I still do. So I hope that you'll join us. I'll tell you a little bit as an employer. I found a community here in Hand. You can get support, guidance, questions, answers, sample forms, new law information, such as we're experiencing right now. And so it's a national network across the country of employers, of nannies, house cleaners, home attendants, other domestic workers. And it's just such a rich resource for people who employ them. So Hand in Hand was founded in 2010 by domestic employers who drew on their own experiences of confusion and isolation and tried to figure out how to be good employers when their home became someone else's workplace. So we believe that it benefits everyone when our homes are workplaces that are just and they're fair and they're kind. Each year, there are thousands of new employers. There's people who become new parents and need to hire a nanny. There's people whose aging parents fall ill. And they need to provide somebody to provide care and support for them. So there's so much to learn and there's so much to grow together on. So please join us, become a member of Hand in Hand in NYC. We can support each other. We can organize to raise standards. We can make history in raising those standards as we're able to lobby for various laws. And we live our interdependence very closely with other organizations who care about this work and who care about the people who make all of their work possible. Thank you all. Have a good day.
Thank you. Thank you, Salwa, and especially thank you for joining us while you are still not fully recovered. And yes, this happens, right? That we not only need to fight, keep advocating for a better standards in the care industry, but we face those challenges in our own workplace when we don't have access to basic leave. Now I'm very pleased to introduce our main speaker, Amalia Torrentes, who is Hand in Hand New York City employer education consultant, and who will be talking about the sick and safe leave law and employers' obligations and industry standards.
Thank you, Tatiana. To our participants, I want to reiterate that this is your space for domestic employers and workers. We're here for you, so feel free to make comments and ask questions as we go along. I'm going to start with some background to give you context on the paid safe and sick leave law. So New York City has one of the most advanced laws in the countries that protect domestic workers. Paid safe and sick leave is one of the most important protections for low-wage workers, domestic workers, restaurant workers, and other workforces. There are only 14 states that have laws protecting sick leave. Protections for safe leave for victims of domestic violence, sexual abuse, or harassment are even more rare. New York City paid safe and sick leave went into effect April of 2014, and at this time, domestic workers were entitled to 2 paid safe and sick leave days with a waiting period of 1 year. In September of 2020, the law was amended to provide 40 hours of paid sick leave with no waiting period. So there was no paid safe and sick leave law in New York State up until April of 2020. That was just recent. And outside of New York City, within the state of New York, domestic workers are not eligible for paid leave. However, nationwide, hand in hand recommends paying for paid safe and sick leave because it's the right thing to do. Labor laws exist to protect workers, but also to provide guidance to employers. Prior to 2010, there weren't any protections for domestic workers. And thanks to the organizing between domestic workers and employers, domestic workers who are mostly immigrant women of color can access rights and protections like any other workers. So before they were excluded, and now they have these wonderful, amazing protections thanks to the lobbying, to the rallying, to the organizing between employers and workers. I want you to know that laws and protections should be in place regardless of immigration status, whether the worker works part-time or full-time, are being paid off or on the books. It doesn't matter. Laws in New York State still apply. It's important for you to be aware of what the law holds you responsible for. Sometimes you will need to provide notice of rights. Sometimes you're going to need to purchase a policy or write a policy regarding a benefit, or purchase an insurance policy. So I'm going to give you a quick overview of all the laws that apply to domestic workers and domestic employers. And if you have any questions or you want to know more about these laws, please feel free to reach out to me or share your question in the chat box. So let's start off with the Domestic Worker Bill of Rights. This is a statewide law that includes domestic worker protections, like protections for wages, overtime, disability insurance, and paying unemployment. Employers need to have all of this in place. The Domestic Worker Bill of Rights also includes New York State paid family leave. It provides 12 weeks of paid leave for workers to bond with their child, take care of a sick family member, or to assist loved ones when a family member is deployed abroad on an active military service. The New York City Human Rights Law provides protection for a discrimination-free workplace. Employers must provide a notice of rights. Consider that workers are protected based on several protected classes, such as race, religion, nationality, immigration status, gender, age, and color. New York City paid safe and sick leave provides workers 40 hours of paid leave. So we're going to go more in depth about this in this presentation. I want you to know that not complying with these laws could mean that you are subject to an investigation and may have to pay fines. So this is why we want to pay attention to all the different laws that apply to domestic employers and workers. So let's go through in details about the New York City paid safe and sick leave law. So how much leave are you required to provide as an employer of a domestic worker? That's a nanny, house cleaner, home care worker. You're required to provide at least 40 hours. This is based on a 9-to-5 work week. We know that full-time domestic workers can work up to 50 hours or more a week. So we recommend that employers provide leave that is reflective of the hours the domestic worker you employ works. For example, if they work 50 hours, provide 50 hours of paid safe and sick leave. How do workers earn this leave? They can either accrue, that is to earn it as they work. For every 30 hours a worker works, they earn 1 hour of leave. If you don't want to keep calculating how much leave is being earned, we recommend front loading. Front loading is when you provide leave up front. You just have to keep track of how much sick leave is used. All workers can roll over their earned time over into the next calendar year. For example, if the worker you employ works 5 hours a week, that means they work 20 hours a month for a total of 240 hours a year. Since you accrue for every 30 hours worked 1 hour, You're going to divide that total, which is 240 hours a year, by 30 hours, and that will give you the amount of paid leave that you can provide upfront, which is going to be 8 hours. If they don't use those hours within the year, those hours can be rolled over and the worker can continue to accrue or earned leave. Hand in Hand makes more detailed recommendations on how to calculate these leaves in our agreements. So do workers have to give notice when calling out? Employers can set a system for providing notice if something is foreseeable, like if in 2 weeks a worker has a specialty appointment. But workers are also allowed to call out unexpectedly if they are not feeling well that day. Related to this, employers ask if they can ask for a doctor's note. Although the law allows employers to ask for a doctor's note after the worker you employ uses 3 consecutive days of paid safe and sick leave, Hand in Hand recommends you do not ask for documentation. One reason is because 49% of workers don't have health insurance, and most do not choose to go to the doctor. Asking them to go to the doctor for a doctor's note would actually be a burden. Most of our own employers don't require a doctor's note. We can just call out. So it's the same thing with the domestic worker that we employ. They can just call out if needed. So let's talk about implementing paid safe and sick leave at home. Employers must provide a written notice of right to paid safe and sick leave. You must give workers a written paid safe and sick leave policy that explains how to use this benefit. If this is sounding like Chinese and you have no clue what I'm talking about, the great thing is that Hand in Hand has created an agreement that actually incorporates the language of the law and tells you everything you need to know. And they've also created a one-pager for employer obligations. Lastly, I want you to know that employers must inform employees of their accrued use, their total leave balances each week. For example, you can do this through a pay stub, or if you have an electronic system, for example, like an Excel sheet or Google Drive that you share that information in, but you have to be able to keep track of that time and give the worker the balance that they have to use. So the Notice of Rights to Paid Safe and Sick Leave can be found on the website for the Department of Consumer Affairs and Worker Protection and is translated in 26 different languages. We've linked this in the chat. So I would like to invite Liz Weiner to tell us what it means to have a written agreement and why it's important to have a long-standing relationship with the person you employ at home. Liz, you have the floor.
Hey everyone, I'm really excited to be here and share a little bit. So I'm Liz Weiner. I'm an employer of a nanny and a house cleaner. I live in Park Slope and I'm a member of Hand in Hand. In my own working relationships, I found that the best way to have a respectful labor relationship with the people that I employ at home is by having a written agreement. So in my home, our work agreement was an opportunity for me to really think about and communicate my expectations and be on the same page, especially with our nanny. And, you know, right from the get-go. So it helped us to establish not only things like schedule and wages and safe and sick leave and sick time, but also sort of the approach that we were looking for in the work and how we wanted to think about our employment relationship. And we put in all sorts of things about when she would still come if our kid was sick and when she wouldn't, what sort of symptoms were okay, things about COVID, safety measures, masking. There's just a lot, especially nowadays, that can make people uncomfortable in both directions. So we used our written agreement to really make the implicit explicit and just make sure that we had an opportunity to talk about all those things. We put them in writing, that she could review it, that we could review it, and we could both make changes before we entered into sort of that working relationship. For us, it also just helped us to be more aware of meeting our legal obligations and also meeting our sort of moral and ethical obligations to being good employers and making sure that we were being good employers to the person who takes care of our kids, which is like the most important thing that she can do, that we want her to do well and feel safe doing. So that's been really good for us, and for us and our nanny, our work agreement is a living document, right? So it's for us, any changes in wages or hours. We've always had a verbal conversation, but then we also update the work agreement just so that we both have the most up-to-date what we agree to and can refer to it at any time. And as I've learned from Amalia about the laws, regardless of whether or not you pay someone on or off the books, these work agreements are mostly about coming to an understanding. So you can have one no matter if they work full-time or part-time, their immigration status, on or off the books. The kinds of things that we put in our working agreement, many of them are not legal at all, and nobody would really get involved. It's more about communicating those expectations, giving our domestic employee the opportunity to communicate her expectations to us, and making sure that we all have a respectful working relationship so that she can, do her job well, and we can trust her to do that.
Thank you, Liz. It's great to hear from experiences of employers who are taking the time to get guidance and support to do the right thing. Hand in Hand has created sample workplace agreements for nannies, house cleaners, or housekeepers and home attendants. The work agreement is going to cover, like Liz said, how to be compliant with the laws. And for example, for paid safe and sick leave, you're supposed to have a written policy using language required by the law. Everything in your policy must match up with what the law requires. And this will include how an employee is required to take sick leave or safe leave, how much time is given, how can be taken, rolling over unused leave, the process for calling out, anything and everything regarding how to take sick leave should be written. Other items are going to include your wages and human resource policy, basic information like the start date and responsibilities, a system for open and respectful communication, and how to create a healthy workplace. So all of this stuff, including like how you can include paid time off and vacation days. And the great thing is with these sample agreements is that you don't have to research all these different things. It's provided to you. Obviously, we welcome you to do that, but it's all provided as a guidance in this one pager. So it's really useful for everyone. Again, if you have any questions or any comments, you guys can put that in the chat box. We'll really welcome them as we go along. This is a lot of information. So we want to make sure that we're addressing your questions and your comments and making sure that we're providing the information that you need. So we want to hear from you. We're going to take a little pause. We would like for participants to share your experience as an employer or a worker. We would like you to share any challenges, successes, any comments you have about using paid safe and sick leave. And I'm going to invite Meches to come and share her experience about paid safe and sick leave.
Hi everyone. It's so nice to be here with all of you and sharing my experience. I'm a nanny, and I've been a nanny for the past 17 years of my life, and I'm so excited to be part of this movement, because through the movement I know all my rights and my responsibilities, because it was hard in the beginning when I didn't know anything, and you just because I was an immigrant woman, I just say yes to all my employers without knowing that I have rights. But now that I know, it's good to know that I have a sick days and that I can use them, and how to ask for them. And that's really like a really amazing thing to have. And also as a nanny, it's so nice to because sometimes the 99% of the time you get sick because the kid is sick, and then because you were taking care of the kid, you get sick. And then it's so nice when the employer say, "Meche, you are sick, take a few days because I know my son make you sick, take some days off." Because I feel like it's so unrespectful, because in one occasion I was sick because I was taking care of a kid, and when it was the time to pay me, they didn't pay me for the days I took off because I was sick, and that was so unrespectful I was feeling. And it's worse when the family is saying to you, oh, we love you, we love you. But when it's the time to show the love, they don't do it. And then it's so painful because, you know, as a worker, you depends in this job to survive. And if they don't pay you because you get sick. And like the funny part is because like I say, I was sick partying. I was taking care of your daughter. That's when I get sick. And then it's not fair that you don't pay. But now that I'm being here and I learn and I know my rights and I'm empowered, I know how to ask and say, well, we should have all of this and we should have a contract and a agreement with all the things. But it's very important because also as a nanny, sometimes you get also the mental health days that is so in style now, no? Because when you are working with kids, sometimes you really need like a day off just to like relax, especially during the winter time when you are the kids just on top of you because there's not so many places to go. Sometimes you need just that day to stay home with everything quiet. But I feel like it's so important that we get this kind of stuff because it's for the safety of everyone. Because when the nanny is in a good shape and she's safe and she feels safe and she's in a good mood and also in a well health, you see, then she will do her job better. And then and also when she feel appreciated, the job will get better. And that's so important because we don't want any accidents. Because you know, kind of the nanny, if you don't give sick days, the nanny can come sick with a flu, for example, and she can, because she has fever, she can fall asleep and something can happen to the kid, no? And then it's for that it's so important that nannies and house cleaners and home care have sick days because it's the human thing to do also. Thank you.
Thank you, Matches. I love that you said that it's the human thing to do because we all get sick and we all need a mental health day sometimes. And you're absolutely right. Showing the love, the appreciation, but most importantly, the respect happens when there's an agreement. When I tell you, you have the right to your sick days and you have a right to be paid for your sick days. So that's very important. And I want to thank you for sharing your experiences, both good and bad, because we learn from those experiences, from not getting paid. And then also while having an employer who is very generous and who tells you, yes, you can get paid because you got sick from my child. So thank you. I appreciate your sharing your story. I want to encourage you guys to continue to share your stories. Your stories are so powerful, whether they come from an employer point of view or from a worker point of view. They are empowering to be able to know that there's a community that does believe in providing paid, safe, and sick leave, and we can learn from each other's experiences. So we're going to go through one scenario, and we're going to see how the law applies. So Joy seems to be very happy with the nanny she hired to provide care for her child. Joy is moving out of town and wants to support the nanny to find a new job. And she tells other parents that her nanny is so wonderful because she has never taken a paid, safe, and sick day in 4 years. So employers want to do the right thing, but many times when they assume or we assume what's the right thing or the good thing without realizing, we can actually have a negative impact. So I would ask Liz, as an employer, what do you think is wrong with this scenario?
I would just say that I think a nanny or a worker can take paid sick time and still be reliable. It's not mutually exclusive. Our nanny has taken sick time to take care of herself, to take care of her family. You know, she needs to do that so that when she shows up the other, whatever, 98% plus of the time when she isn't sick or she isn't taking that leave, she can do her job well. And I wouldn't let taking sick time impact how I think about her performance. It wouldn't affect how I give a reference. And if I wanted to highlight how reliable she was, I would say that in a reference instead of focusing on the fact that someone, I don't know, if you say you've never taken a sick day, it just means you've worked sick, because it's very hard to imagine someone's never been sick, especially someone who takes care of small germy children like mine.
Thank you, Liz. So you want to be aware of the power dynamics to reassure that paid sick time should be taken. Actually, 46% of workers feel they can't take sick leave without reprisal. So what does that tell us? It tells us that if workers don't take a sick day, it's because they are scared of being fired. It's if it's the norm that workers don't take a sick day, like in the scenario, then we have to make sure that workers know that we won't take any negative action against them for taking safe and sick leave. Otherwise, workers will come into work sick, and that won't be good for anyone in the home or their own well-being. So from the hiring process, you want to make sure you have a conversation about complying with the law. You want to discuss the details on how they can use it, be clear on what happens if the worker you employ gets sick. And it's never too late to put a work agreement in place. So even if you don't have one, you can start today. Be clear about what the policy is. The job of the employer is to talk about these issues. You want to be able to build a fair workplace. And sometimes when we listen to, let's say, like, it's so isolated that employers go to Facebook for advice, or they go to a group chat for advice. And sometimes what people are doing behind closed doors doesn't match up what the law requires an employer to do. So we want to make sure that the advice we're listening to is according to what the law requires. And we're not actually perpetuating unfair practices, because I'm sure Joy thought, like, there's nothing abnormal. This is like the greatest employee that I have, right? This is the greatest domestic worker. She's never taken a sick leave ever before. And I mean, most of the time domestic workers won't take leave because they're so committed to their job, or because they think they're going to get fired. So sometimes it looks like it's a good thing, but it's really a bad thing, because, like, as Meche says, we're all humans and we all need to take a sick day. So we want to make sure that as domestic employers, we're creating space for workers to be able to make sure that they know that they have this right, that we're paying them when they take sick leave or safe leave. And if you ever need advice, you can just come to Hand in Hand, because we'll answer all your questions. It's not a judgmental place. We know that employers don't have the support that they need, that they have to go to different agencies to be able to get that advice. So we're here for you, so you can ask your questions. If you don't want to do it in public, you can send your email. I'll be more than happy to communicate with you.
My last thing I forgot to say, I'm sorry, Amadia, is just that one thing we do is I do try to specifically call out, like, I've taken sick leave to take my kid to the doctor or whatever, and just specifically calling out, like, I take a sick day from my work because that's important for me to do. And if you need to do that, that's fine. And that, I think, has made it easier for our domestic employee to understand that I really mean it, and it's not just something we put on paper.
Yeah, that's really important, from bringing the paper to the actual language that you use in conversation, and making that space. And that, especially with COVID-19, we definitely recommend that you make that space to check in, to see if they need to use a sick day, to see if they need to get tested, if you're talking about an exposure between the home and the worker in the home, both ways. So it's really important that employers remember how to use that language when speaking with a worker, and actually providing that space for workers to say, like, yes, I need to take a sick day. So thank you very much, Liz, for sharing. So everyone knows about sick leave, but we don't really necessarily know about safe leave. So safe leave is designated for any safety measures an employee needs to take for themselves or for their family if they are a victim of domestic violence, unwanted sexual contact, stalking, or human trafficking. For the safety of the employee or for the family member, because it's both. It's not just for their own safety, it's for them or their family. And then sick leave is used. Last thing I wanted to mention is that it is reported that 21% of domestic workers feel unsafe in their home. So some people, they don't need to tell you why they're using it. They may just say, I need to take leave. And if they have it, they're able to access that. Sick leave is used for medical care, to recover from illness or an injury, or to take a mental health day. It's also used to take care of a family member who is sick or has a medical appointment. And a very important thing to consider is that under the law, anyone you consider family, it doesn't have to be blood, is considered, you can take a sick day for that. Like if you need to take care of your neighbor who you consider family, you can do that. You can also use a sick day when your home or your employee's child's school closes due to a public health emergency. So for example, you had a public health emergency and you had to come home early, and then you didn't need your employee anymore to stay there. You can, or they needed to go and pick up their child because their child had an emergency, they can go and use a sick day as well. Under the law, workers do not need to disclose why they're using safe or sick leave. They do not need to tell you their illnesses or why they're taking off. They can just simply say, I'm taking safe and sick leave. Lastly, it is illegal to punish or fire employees for requesting, using safe or sick leave, or reporting violations. So let's say you have a nanny who's an organizer and she's telling all of her nanny friends about paid safe and sick leave. And we want to support that. That's a good thing that she's doing. It would be illegal for you to fire her or to decrease work hours because she's telling other people about safe and sick leave. New York State emergency. So let's talk about COVID-19 and the COVID-19 crisis. So New York State emergency COVID-19 paid safe and sick leave law protects workers during their quarantine time. Workers cannot be fired for having COVID-19 and they're entitled to job protection. So while they're quarantining, it's not their fault that they contracted COVID-19. It's happening. We're all affected by it. They do have job protection, and you can actually pay their wages through paid family leave. If you have that policy, it covers their quarantine time. If they need to quarantine multiple times, the paid family leave can be paid intermittently, and it will cover their quarantine multiple times. If you do not have a policy in place, we recommend you look into purchasing one, but in the interim, pay the worker you employ. Domestic workers are eligible for 4 hours of paid leave per vacation injections, so a total of 8 hours. And additionally, New York City paid safe and sick leave law provides 4 extra hours of paid leave per child. So if the domestic worker you employ has a child and they need to get a vaccination for COVID-19, or they're suffering any any side effects, they're able to take some time off. The law gives them an additional 4 hours per child per injection. So it may seem like things are getting better because we aren't talking so much about COVID-19 in the media as we did before, but we are still being affected. Now, monkeypox is on the rise, and both are infectious diseases, and we are required to put safety measures in place to keep our families and our homes and the worker we employ safe. So you want to start by having a conversation about what is going on and how you can protect each other. Have these conversations often and check in regarding symptoms every day if possible. So OSHA has developed a tool. OSHA is the federal government agency that regulates health and safety in the workplace, and they developed a checklist for symptoms. It's a tool that you can use if you don't have one. Also, Hand in Hand has a COVID-19 checklist just to help you out through this time. You want to ask if the domestic worker you employ feels safe in your home, and what can you do to help them feel safer. So have things you may want to do is to have a sanitation station or access to soap and water so they can clean their hands. You want to keep social distancing, continue to avoid handshakes. If the worker you employ or someone in your home has symptoms, we have provided information for where to get tested in the chat, where you have access to free or low-cost healthcare. If someone needs to quarantine multiple times, like we said, paid family leave can be taken intermittently, and we'll cover that. If you don't have a policy in place, pay the person you employ while you're getting that policy. Also, you want to prepare for an emergency. So if we stated that for domestic worker, they can call out unexpectedly. For example, if they found out that they were positive for COVID-19 from one day to another. As employers, we need to have a plan B in place. So you want to be able to prepare for an emergency when the worker you employ gets sick. If someone in your home gets sick, what's the protocol for that? So right now, there are no specific laws regarding monkeypox for quarantine yet, but I'm sure that those things, as the cases rise, they're going to create laws that apply for monkeypox quarantine. So finally, do not treat the worker you employ differently because you think they have, or they have had COVID-19 or monkeypox. Doing so can be considered discrimination, so you want to be careful of that. We provided a link to the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene in the chat box for more information about COVID-19 and monkeypox. So now we're going to go to my favorite part of the webinar, which is answering questions. Does anybody have any questions?
I have a question, and I'll add a comment. Hi, Amalia. Thank you guys for doing this, everybody, with Hand in Hand. I'm Elisa Cesarini. I own Innovative Youth Care. We're an agency, a high road agency in New York City that helps families find nannies, and we educate them on fair and equal employment practices like we're discussing here tonight, helping people write contracts, etc. I had a question a few weeks ago from a family that we are advising because we work with families that pay us to find nannies, and these are typically families that are paying on the books, doing things the legal way. And I've advised families and domestic workers that are unable to be paid on the books, et cetera, families that are working with these individuals and are met through some way and they're, undocumented and they would like to work with this person, but do things to the best of their ability given their circumstances. So I was asked if writing agreements when someone is not being paid on the books, what risk is that for an employer? What risk does an employer have, if any? And I'm asking that because I've been advising that really these one sheet agreements hold no weight in the court of law. For example, if somebody is told you will get, 5 days paid vacation and they don't give it to you, by law, it's their right. So the work agreement, so you have to correct me if I'm wrong, Amalia, the work agreement itself could not be presented if that person is not being paid on the books. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Oh, that's a great question. Thank you, Elisa, for pointing that out and for bringing that up. So a work agreement for us in New York City, anybody can create a work agreement. A work agreement is an understanding about how work is going to happen in my home, right? What we're saying is that there's so many things to think about because there's no HR department like you would have in a regular company to tell you this is when you start, this is what happens when you're late, these are your benefits, right? All these different things are included in a work agreement. Part of that is going to be what the law requires. So like we're saying for paid safe and sick leave, if the employer says, I'm going to give you 5 days paid sick, or I'm going to give you 10, let's say the employer says, I'm going to give you 10 paid safe and sick leave days, right? That's actually, when you already said it, it's already legally binding because you, the employer, are actually saying that you're going to give this to the domestic worker you employ. So it's enough for a domestic worker to write it down and say, on August 10th, 2022, my employer said that they were going to give me 10 paid safe and sick leave days. The reason why we want to have it in writing is so that both parties can be clear and because the law requires it. The law in New York City requires you to actually have a written policy with a lot of different things, which we outline in the agreement and also like on our one pager about employer obligations, about all these different things, because it's really hard to remember all of your benefits from memory, right? And it's really confusing if you walk into a workplace where you don't know what your benefits are, right? So, and it's really hard to come into a workplace where you're scared to ask for paid safe and sick leave. But if your employer comes and talks to you from the beginning and says, we want you to know who's in our family. This is part of our family. We want you to know what your responsibilities are, A, B, C, D. We want you to know that Jerry has to be picked up from karate school at 3 p.m. every Thursdays. We want you to know also that part of your benefits is going to be that you have vacation days and then you have sick days. Then you have it all written and you start creating structure for your home. So that's the reason why it's not about like getting in trouble. It's more like helping employers to create that structure. That being said, on the flip side, what happens if you don't provide, whether you verbally said it, whether you have it in writing, what happens if you don't provide that sick time? So an employee can go to the Department of Consumer Affairs and Worker Protection and submit a complaint, and then an investigation will happen. The laws in New York City, it doesn't matter your immigration status. It doesn't matter whether you're full-time or part-time. It doesn't matter anything pretty much about your status from the workplace. If you're being hired in the home, you're a regular employee just like anybody else, and you're going to have access to those benefits. So the law doesn't look at immigration status or whether you're full-time or part-time or whether you're paying off the books or on the books. You're still required to provide paid safe and sick leave.
Thank you, Amalia. That was exactly what I wanted to hear.
Very welcome. That's a great question.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously I deal with this a lot, helping parents understand what their obligations are, not only legally, but like morally. And I think it's great that, you know, Liz and I can't think of
Saula,
I,
Saula.
yes, I mean Metche, I love Metche, everyone knows it. I love you all. But yes, I think that it's important that people are, you know, sharing, you know, specifically what they're doing above even the law, because that's typically how I'm advising, you know, the same as hand in hand, that it's, you know, there's a lot of laws in place, but the reality of the experience of a domestic worker is that the laws have never really reflected what they deserve. So we're always like 10 steps behind where we actually should be. So, you know, 2 weeks paid vacation is what I recommend for anybody with a full-time household staff member. And I recommend a week paid vacation for someone who's working under 25 hours a week, because the truth of the matter is this job is ever changing. And when people work in anyone's home, you know, it's typically not easy and they want you to be flexible. And if you're flexible, a lot of times that can completely take over all of your time and availability to work with more than one family. So it's important that, you know, parents recognize that when they're having even conversations with other families that are, you know, looking for a nanny 5 days a week for 20 hours a week. You know, there's this, well, you know, you want somebody for all of the hours after school, which is the prime time for nannies, but you don't want to give them any benefits, but they're sacrificing their entire week to work for you part-time.
Yeah. And
So
the
those
truth,
are all, yeah.
yeah,
those
the
are all
truth is
good
that goes
things.
back to valuing the person that's working in your home, and understanding the value that they're bringing into your life, right? So um if if the employer was able to do all of those things, either take care of your children, clean the home, take care of the elderly parent, you know, then there would be no need for domestic workers. But domestic workers, they do all those things and then make employers available to do other things that they need to do. And that's why they're so pivotal to society. Without domestic workers, you know, you wouldn't be able to go to work. You know, you wouldn't have that time, that time to go to work. You wouldn't, you know, there's a reason why you hire domestic workers, and it's because you need them, you know, and you know, all of these things are rooted in history where domestic workers were excluded from protections because they weren't considered real work. But it's real work, and they are deserving of benefits and paid safe and sick leave and vacation. they work as hard as any other person or more, because a lot of the times they're working a lot more hours, 50, 60, 70 hours a lot of the time. So thank you, Lisa. Does anybody else have any? Oh, go ahead, Tatiana.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to add that it's a very thin line when we talk about what is legally binding between a written agreement and a written contract, right? So I think I will suggest to maybe go a bit deeper, get more contact maybe a lawyer if you want that to be more legally binding, specifically to use terminology, if you want not to really have more a contract than an agreement. And we can always send more information after this webinar, because what we are providing is really more like a guidance to how to write an agreement, no, and which is different from a contract. I just wanted to add that. Mm-hmm.
Does anybody else have any questions? ¿Hay alguna otra persona que tiene una pregunta sobre sus días de descanso, de enfermedad?
No, gracias. Lo estoy entendiendo todo.
Oh, qué bueno. Me encanta que me pudo entenderlo. So we have a couple of questions that employers have submitted. So one of the questions was, do you have to pay out sick leave when transitioning out of employment? So the law doesn't require you to pay out sick leave, though hand in hand does recommend on a higher standard to pay out that sick leave because they earned it and they accrued it, but it's not required on the law. Another one is, how does pay leave roll over? So at the end of the year, whatever hours you have, you can roll over up to 40 hours. So whatever hours that you have accrued that you haven't used at the end of the year, you can roll that over into the next calendar year. So it's not like if you don't use it, you lose it. You continue to accrue those hours, and by the start of the new year, you have something, like if you say you get the flu, you get the cold in January, you have something to use. The other question is, what happens if you didn't have paid leave before and you want to do it now? So employers have an option to, if you're front loading, if you're providing all of those hours up front, you can pay that person out for the time that they didn't use the sick leave, whatever time they accrued. Or you can say, like, this is all of the time that you accrued in the year that you worked with me, and you can start with these hours and then continue on. So it's never too late to start having paid safe and sick leave and have a policy. You do want to make sure that you are responsible for the amount of time that you have not been accruing or telling the worker you employ about the time that they haven't used, okay, or the time that you thought they didn't have paid sick leave, and now you know, and you wanna compensate them for that. Just calculate how much time that they would have that for every year that they worked with you, and you can either pay them out or you have that time that they can use starting from that point forward. Any other questions? Any comments? Well, thank you guys. I'm going to pass it on to Tatiana.
Thank you, Amalia. Yeah, before ending well, first of all, this is great. It's been fantastic to hear all this great information, learning together about employer responsibilities, having clarity on how you can implement pay, safe, and sick leave at home. There are so many questions, there are so much to learn. No, and this is actually makes us realize that in the last 10 years, New York City has passed many laws and protections for domestic workers. And that has been possible because not only workers, but also employers have come together, have joined a movement not to improve, to raise standards in the care sector. because it's important for workers to be protected, to work happy in our homes, but also for employers to have the guidance and the support that they need, when they hire someone. When we have good practices, it really benefits workers and employers. It really benefits everyone at home, our kids, our parents, our homes, our communities. And I will invite you to join our Hand in Hand community, to become a member of Hand in Hand. You will access information, resources, you will listen and hear from other employers. You will also be heard. You could influence as well, how we are shaping the care industry, the care infrastructure in New York City. And in few years, we could continue celebrating more victories, and that again will benefit us all. I think we have shared how you can become a member of Hand in Hand. We meet more or less once a month. We have dialogues, conversations, really in which we connect our care stories. We connect in the human level, as most of us are women on this call, as well in that sense, right? How as women, we are part of this care community, right? With COVID, we have realized that a lot of care continues relying on us. So how we can also improve that, right? So so this is really a huge topic, and it's always very productive and rich and makes us all feel great when we finish this kind of conversations. And and then I just, want to thank our fantastic speakers tonight, Amalia, Salwa, Liz, Meches, Alisa, and everyone who has been able to share and their experiences, in this sector. And I think maybe the last slide, Amalia, so we could share our email addresses, our websites, if you want to access our resources, and also want to reach out to us directly as well. You can, you have here the ways that we can keep in touch, stay in touch. And thank you again to everyone. Keep enjoying this beautiful summer evening. Get a glass of wine so you can relax before going to bed, or just hot tea or hot milk. And we'll see you next time. We'll be continuing this fight and these awesome conversations together. See you and have a great night. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Good night.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Oops, we're ending tonight.